day left, and then after that, you're hanging out with us May 12th or May 14th or 15th. So, snow all at once.
We really haven't had that many snow days, though.
You had 2 last week.
How many snow days do you
I thought we at least get a week of snow days.
It's 5 days, right?
I don't know how many we schedule
We
in.
should have like 3 more.
Yeah, the first couple don't count.
Yeah, but
Yeah, no, believe it or not, they do.
School when it's cold than 80 degrees.
Yeah, right?
I'd rather have school during the summer.
Well,
No way.
sorry. I'm sorry that's how you feel. It's a good thing you graduate because you're not getting your money.
I kind
I'm
of
not
like
sitting
it.
inside.
So, fractions, decimals, and percents. Percent just means per 100. That's all you need there in your vocabulary. Percent means per 100. So the percent symbol that you see there, and you're very familiar with, is what we use to denote percents. 100 charts, however many you have colored in, represents the percent of that 100 chart that's colored in, right? So you count the squares. 48 of the 100 squares are shaded in, so 48% of that box is shaded in. Got it? Easy peasy. 48 over 100 is our fraction because there are 100 total squares. 48 of those are colored in. So, on the back of your paper, if there are 100 parrots, 58 of them are female. What percent of the parrots are female? 58%. Now, this is a question that they do not ask you that I am going to ask you. What percent of these parrots are male?
42.
I really thought that I would trip you up.
You just subtract the 58 off the 100.
You do just subtract that 58 off of the 100. Okay.
Today's summer's
Pardon me?
going to be pretty easy.
It is going to be super easy, 31 out of 100 instructors are in their 40s. What percentage of instructors are in their 40s? 31%. And what percent of instructors are not in their 40s?
Whatever's left.
79.
69.
I was getting ready to say, how dare you say 79? Goodness sakes. Okay, so 31% are in their 40s and the rest are not in their 40s. You just subtract that from 100. So we talk about writing a percent as a decimal. If you are given a percent and we have to change that into a decimal, we multiply by 100th. Or an easier way to think about that is we move our decimal point 2 places, right? Because when we multiply by 100, we have 2 places behind our decimal point here. So we start with our decimal point and you just move it 2 places. So when you change a percent to a decimal, move that decimal 2 places. So let's practice. 49% as a decimal is 0.49. 3.8 as a decimal.
It's already a decimal.
3.8% as a decimal. It does have a decimal in it, but what did we just say we have to do?
0.038.
So close. We're moving this how many places?
0.03.
You have to add that extra 0 in there. Right now our decimal point started here. We have to slide it over 2 places.
When it is a decimal, you move it 2 times to the left, and then you put 2.
Why did you say I was wrong? I was right.
You
I just
didn't.
have the 0 in front. I said 0.038.
I'm sorry. What I heard come out of your mouth was 0.38.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, okay. So we just move that 2 places to the left. 185%. Again, I don't think I heard.
85.
Thank you.
Oh my god.
So we're going to multiply that or move our decimal 2 places to the left, and it's 1.85.
85. My brain isn't braining.
More than 100% gives us a whole number. Okay? So if you have 200%, that would give you a 2 in front of that decimal. If you had 300%, that would give you that whole number 3. That means whatever you have 3 whole ones plus part of another. It's like a mixed number. Make sense?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Last one. 0.69%. 0.00. We have to move that decimal place twice. 0.0069. Questions about turning a percent into a decimal?
Nope.
Good. So let's practice writing a percent as a fraction. When they give us a percent, we know that is always over 100, right? No matter what, it's always over 100. Even if that percent is a decimal, even if that percent is a fraction, we're putting it over 100 and then we're converting from there. So the first one they give us is 60%. 60% is what is a fraction?
60.
Okay, now we have to look at 60 over 100 and say, how can I simplify that down? 30 over 50, which is also divisible by, so you divided each of those by 2 and said 30 over 50. Those are both divisible by 10, right? Or you can say both of them are divisible by 20 to start with. So your final answer is going to be 3/5. So 60% reduces down to 3/5.
And so when you're doing the assignment, they will want you to in lowest terms.
I believe they always want them in lowest terms. However, we get to a portion in this review where it says write it as a mixed number, and they don't write it in a mixed number. So I believe that, yes, it will always be in lowest terms. So here's our first decimal one. We have 1.4%. So 1.4 goes over 100. Because I have that decimal in there, I am going to multiply to get my decimal out of there. Remember when we did that? We want to move that decimal out of there. So we're going to multiply both of those by 10 to change it to 14 over 1,000. Okay? Does that make sense? We want that decimal out of there over the top of our 100. So whatever we do to the top, we have to do to the bottom. Now I have 14 over 1,000. Can that be reduced?
Yeah.
Yes, it can. By 2. Those are both even numbers. They're both divisible by 2. Once we factor out that 2, we have 7 over 500. So 150%. 150 is going to go over the top of what? Not 1,000. It's a percent. Has to go over 100. So we're putting 150 over the top of 100. Can I reduce that down?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I can reduce that down by 50. 50 factors out of both of those. 50 goes into 150 how many times?
3 times.
3. 50 goes into 100 how many times?
2.
2. So that reduces then down to 3 over 2,
Then you gotta make it.
which is, if I reduce that to a whole or a mixed number, what is that mixed number going to be? 1 1/2, absolutely. So 150% is the same as 1 1/2. 66 2/3%. When they give us a fraction to put over a fraction, we want to change this back into an improper fraction. So what does that become? How do I do that? And then, so 66 times 3 plus 2 gives me what? 200, and I put that over the top of 3. Now I want that over the top of 100. So I can just multiply straight across. Because I want my 100 on the bottom of my fraction, right? But I already have a 3 hanging out on the other side of my fraction. So I multiply those together, and I end up with 200 over 300. $200 over 300 reduces down to, not 1 over 3. 2 over 3. I can take 100 out of both of those. Both of those are divisible by 100, so it reduces down to 2 over 3. Questions about that one? It's a lot of work, a lot of steps to remember. Next, 12%. 12 goes over what? Was nice of them to end with an easier one, right? Can 12 over 100 be reduced? By what?
2.
It can. Is there a bigger number?
6. 4.
Let's reduce it by 4. 4 goes into 12 how many times? 3, and 4 goes into 100 how many times? So we end up with 3 over 25. Reducing these fractions is probably going to be the hardest part of your assignment today. Then we have decimals that we have to turn into percents. If we had, think back to when we were doing percents that we had to turn into decimals, we moved our decimal 2 places to the left. Now we have decimals, we're turning into percents. So we're multiplying those by 100, so we're moving our decimal 2 places to the right. Okay? Your first example is 0.26. What percent is 0.26? 26%. Your next example is 1.46. What percent? What? 146%. Your next example is 0.09. 9%. Your next example is 0.7. Is it 70 or is it 7, Mikey?
No, you gotta have a 0.
It is 70. We have to move it 2 places. It is 70%. The next one, 0.061. If I turn that into a percent, what percent is that going to be?
6.1.
6.1%. So we still have a number past our decimal, and that is fine. Finally, we have fractions that we need to turn into percents. In order to have a fraction into a percent, we take, so they multiply it times 100. We're still multiplying times 100%. This time the 100 goes on top as we multiply straight across instead of on the bottom. When we do that, we end up with 100 over 8. When I do these, I like to do them the other direction. I like to divide my fraction first, then multiply by 100. So 1 divided by 8 times 100, okay? They say multiply by 100 first and then divide. I disagree. I think it is easier to divide first and then multiply. So you may use your calculators for these. If we have 3/20ths and we want to write that as a percent, what do I type in my calculator first? 3 divided by 20. And then I'm going to multiply by 100. And I end up with 15%.
Can I go to the bathroom real quick?
Can you wait?
No, I gotta pee.
We're almost done.
Oh,
You're fine. Okay, we have 1 3/4. 1 3/4. You can either turn this into an improper fraction before you multiply by 100, or you can just take 3 divided by 4. What is 3/4 as a decimal? If I have 3/4, what do I have? 75. I have a whole number here. I know my whole number goes in front of my decimal point. And then I have my fraction. If I'm going to turn that into a percent, I multiply that by 100 and I have 175%. So, in summary, here's what we covered on how to turn percents, decimals, and fractions into each other back and forth. Here are some more examples. I don't know why I have that last one down there. 67% of American men are happy with their weight. What is this percent as a decimal? 0.67. And as a fraction, it is 67 over 100. Oh, there's where I got my 1/5. An advertisement for a stereo system reads 1/5 off. What percent is 1/5? How do I figure this? And then it is 0.2, which is what percent? 20%. If you work with fifths, you will find out that 1/5 is 20%, 2/5 are 40%, 3/5 are 60%, 4/5 are 80%. Okay, I just count by twos. They're just your 20s. Okay, questions about this assignment? All right, it is online. You may